In the underworld, death never announces itself. It doesn't kick down doors or fire warning shots. It slides in quiet, tucked inside a handshake, whispered into a phone, or poured smoothly into a crystal glass of 25-year-old bourbon. The night the most feared man in New Orleans nearly died. It wasn't a trained bodyguard who pulled him back from the edge. It wasn't a surveillance system or a wire. It was a woman no one in that building had ever bothered to learn the name of, a woman who had spent the last 6 years learning, above all else, how to disappear. Nora Calloway had mastered invisibility the way most people master breathing without thinking, without effort, as automatically as the next heartbeat. At 31, she was what polite society called a sturdy woman, built with the kind of full, rounded softness that didn't fit the narrow mold preferred by the hostesses and cocktail servers who worked the glittering main floor of Velvet and Iron. Velvet and Iron was New Orleans' most exclusive private dining club, tucked behind an unmarked iron door on a quiet stretch of Magazine Street. The name was printed on no website, listed in no directory. You either knew the address or you didn't belong. The interior was a cathedral of dark walnut wood, brushed brass fixtures, and deep burgundy draping that swallowed ambient light like velvet absorbs sound. 6 nights a week. The city's most untouchable figures gathered here, shipping magnates with cartel connections, city councilmen on retainer to organized crime, and the kind of men whose names were spoken carefully, if at all, in the right company. Nora had worked the private lounge on the 2nd floor for 6 years. She was invisible to every last one of them. That invisibility was not accidental. She cultivated it, the flat expression, the precise movements, the downcast eyes. She had learned early that being overlooked in a place like Velvet and Iron was not a disadvantage. It was armor. No one watched what they said around furniture. No one guarded their tone when speaking near a tablecloth, and Nora had heard things extraordinary. Catastrophic things while refilling water glasses and replacing bread plates. She had heard contract terms negotiated over rack of lamb. She had watched envelopes of cash change hands beneath linen napkins. She had logged the names of men who were supposed to be dead. Heard plans spoken aloud that would have made federal investigators weep with gratitude. She said nothing, saw nothing, remembered everything. She had a reason to stay quiet. A debt, $53,000, inherited from her grandmother's catastrophic run of bad decisions at a backroom card table 3 years before she died. A debt that collectors had transferred with interest and with menace directly onto Nora's shoulders. Her tips at Velvet and Iron were extraordinary for a woman of her particular role. She paid down $1,200 a month. Faithfully, without fail. She had 41 months left. She could not afford to be noticed, not tonight of all nights. The tension on the 2nd floor lounge that Tuesday evening in January was the kind that had a physical quality, something you felt pressing against your eardrums, raising the small hairs along your forearms. Nora felt it the moment. She stepped off the service elevator at 7:45, and it didn't ease when she clocked the occupants of table 11. At the head sat Callum Dre, 37 years old, new head of the Dre organization following the abrupt and bloody departure of his uncle 18 months ago. The tabloids that dared acknowledge his existence called him precise. The men who feared him used simpler words. He was lean and dark, featured with a stillness about him that wasn't peace. It was the stillness of something that had learned long ago that movement wastes energy. His eyes, a flat shade of deep brown that gave back no warmth whatsoever. Moved constantly. Cataloguing. Across from him sat Leonard Voss. Voss was in his late 50s. Old money. Old connections. Old contempt for men younger than himself who outranked him. He controlled the river freight operation that ran from Baton Rouge down through the Gulf. A network that moved legitimate cargo above the waterline and considerably less legitimate cargo beneath it. He was loud in the way that powerful men who've never been truly challenged tend to be loud, constantly performing authority. Never quite secure enough to simply have it. At Callum's right sat his head of security, a man named Garrett, who was built like a load-bearing wall and communicated primarily through stillness and the positioning of his hands. At Voss's left was a younger man, the staff called the Weasel in the break room, Voss's personal enforcer. Kletter, a compactly built figure with restless eyes and the particular posture of a man who was always calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Nora stationed herself near the brass service station in the corner. She pressed her back to the wall, draped her linen cloth over her forearm, and observed. The body language at table 11 was wrong. She had watched enough dangerous negotiations in this room to understand the grammar of hostility. Voss was performing deference, smiling too broadly, agreeing too quickly, and it rang false. Men like Leonard Voss did not genuinely capitulate to younger men when they appeared to. It meant the fight was already over in their heads. It meant they had already won by other means. She couldn't hear the specifics across the room, but she read the geometry of it clearly enough. Voss was waiting for something. Callum, precise and unreadable, as always, gave nothing away. Then Voss raised his hand toward the bar. "Let's seal it properly," he said, loud enough to carry across the lounge. "A round of the Pappy Van Winkle, 23, from the private reserve, and let's have it done right." The words landed on Nora's ears with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with the climate-controlled air. Private reserve. Specific vintage. Specific request. She pushed off the wall and moved toward the bar. The bar at Velvet and Iron was managed by a man named Crispin 40-something. Thin in the way that suggested long-standing chemical assistance. Skilled at his craft. And chronically in debt. Nora didn't know the specifics of Crispin's financial situation, but she knew the signs, the micro-flinch whenever his phone buzzed during a shift, the way he tracked certain patrons with a neediness that had nothing to do with hospitality. When she stepped up to the service, well, Cleet was already at the far end of the bar. He wasn't ordering. He was talking, low voice, angled away. When Nora appeared at the well, Cleet stopped mid-sentence, turned, and walked back towards table 11 without acknowledging her. She didn't watch him go. She kept her eyes on the bar surface, the polished brass and lacquered wood that caught reflections like a shallow mirror. "Table 11, she said, her voice carrying just enough to reach Crispin. "Pappy, 23. From the private reserve. 3 glasses. Crispin nodded, not meeting her eyes. His forehead was sheened with sweat that had nothing to do with the heat from the glass rinser. He moved to the locked cabinet, retrieved the bottle, set 3 heavy-bottomed crystal tumblers in a line. Nora watched his reflection in the lacquered surface. Her heart stopped for a full beat, then resumed at double speed. Crispin poured the first 2 glasses generous. Deliberate. Then, before the third, his right hand moved in a gesture so small, so practiced, it would have passed for a nervous scratch. his thumb pressed against the base of his ring finger, and a single colorless droplet fell from what Nora recognized, with stomach-dropping certainty, as a small reservoir vial built into the band of his ring. The droplet disappeared into the bourbon without a ripple. Nora did not react. She had learned 6 years ago that your face is the thing that gets you killed. She kept her expression blank, lifted the tray Crispin set before her, and turned toward table 11. Poison. The word moved through her like cold groundwater. A bullet at velvet and iron would trigger a response from every major organization with business interests in the building. A catastrophic chain reaction. A war conducted in full view of law enforcement, witnesses, and members of the commission who didn't sanction open violence at neutral ground. But a heart attack, a sudden catastrophic cardiac event in a high-stress, high-stakes man in his late 30s, that was medicine. That was grief. That was an obituary and a quiet reshuffling of power by morning. Voss would inherit everything. The tray in Nora's hands weighed nothing. Physically, it felt like she was carrying the world. The poisoned glass was placed at the front right corner of the tray, exactly where protocol demanded she reach first when serving the head of the table. She had 16 steps from the bar to table 11. She counted everyone. The men at table 11 fell quiet when she arrived. Garrett shifted fractionally, standard protocol positioning himself to inspect the tray. Voss leaned back in his chair with the poorly concealed eagerness of a man who has been waiting for a very specific moment to arrive. Nora breathed once, slowly, through her nose. "Gentlemen," she said softly. "Mr. Dre." She stepped to Callum's right. Her fingers moved toward the front right glass. No. She let her weight shift deliberately, with the practiced grace of someone who has spent years learning to weaponize their own body's perceived clumsiness. Her hip caught the heavy brass edge of Voss's armrest, with a dull, solid thud. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she gasped, pitching slightly forward, just enough to force every eye in a 2-foot radius to track the tray's unstable wobble. Voss flinched backward. Garrett reached instinctively toward the table surface to brace it. In the single, unguarded second that followed, Nora's hands moved. Left hand slid the clean glass from the rear of the tray to the front. Right hand guided the poisoned glass smoothly down onto the coaster in front of Leonard Voss. The motion lasted less than a heartbeat. It was fluid, seamless, the kind of sleight of hand that only looks like nothing when performed by someone who has handled hundreds of thousands of trays and knows, to the millimeter, and exactly how much space exists between a crystal glass and a tablecloth. She set the third glass in front of Garrett and stepped back. "My sincerest apologies. Mr. Voss." I lost my footing on the rug. "Watch yourself," Voss said sharply, his attention already back on the table, his excitement barely contained. He hadn't seen a thing. He was too deep in the thrill of what he thought was coming. Nora backed into the shadow of the velvet curtain near the service station and pressed herself against the wall. Her legs were shaking beneath her uniform. She forced herself to look up. Callum Dre had not touched his glass. He was looking at her, not past her. Not through her, at her, with the full, direct attention of a man who sees everything and decides, consciously, what to acknowledge. His expression hadn't changed. It revealed nothing, but he had seen it. She could feel it in the quality of his stillness. She had watched Callum Dre for 6 years in this room. She knew the texture of his awareness, the way his gaze moved in slow, methodical sweeps, cataloging, processing. He had seen Crispin's sweat. He had seen Cleet's conversation at the bar. And now he had watched Nora Calloway, the invisible, forgettable, overlooked woman with the tray, perform an act of silent, impossible bravery. He knew, well, Voss said, lifting his glass with the satisfied ease of a man who has already written his victory speech. To new arrangements. Callum, and to getting exactly what we've earned. Callum lifted his own glass. Slowly, his eyes never left Nora's. To earning exactly what we deserve. Lennart. They drank. Voss set his glass down with a sharp, satisfied clink. He opened his mouth to speak. He didn't get to. His eyes went wide, genuinely. Profoundly wide, with a confusion that lasted only a fraction of a second before it became something else entirely. The color evacuated his face. His hands went to his own throat, fingers clutching at his collar. What? The word came out, wet and wrong. He stood. The motion toppled his oak chair backward. The crash, reverberating off the low ceiling of the lounge like a gunshot. Then his legs gave out, and he went down hard, folding against the edge of the table, sending Crystal to the floor in an explosion of shattering glass. Cleet surged upright. Voss. His hand went for his hip. Garrett was already on his feet, his own weapon clearing its holster with quiet, practiced efficiency. Hence, Garrett said, not loudly, just definitively. Leonard Voss thrashed once, twice, against the Persian rug, his body responding to what was, to any uninformed observer, a catastrophic cardiac event. The synthetic compound, whatever Crispin had used, and Nora didn't want to know the name of it, worked exactly as designed. He went still after 40 seconds. The lounge became chaos. Men at adjacent tables scrambled. A woman screamed somewhere near the staircase. Staff fled through the kitchen corridor, pushing past each other. Trays clattered. Glass broke. Voices bounced off every hard surface in competing registers of panic. Callum Dre did not move. He stood beside the table, jacket still immaculate, hands at his sides. He looked at Voss's motionless figure with the expression of a man reading a weather report. Call the paramedics, he said calmly. To the room in general. Mr. Voss has suffered a medical episode. Clear the lounge. Give him space. Then, unhurried, he turned. He looked directly into the shadow of the velvet curtain. Nora was pressing herself against the wall, both hands clamped over her mouth. Tears. She didn't remember starting to cry, cutting cold lines down her cheeks. Callum held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then he gave her a single, barely perceptible nod. I know what you did. Nora didn't wait. She had watched enough of these rooms for long enough to understand what came next. And what came next was not something she wanted to be present for. She slipped sideways through the service curtain, moved through the kitchen corridor at a pace just below a run, and kept her face down as the shouting and scrambling kitchen staff parted around her like water. She pulled her grey wool coat from her locker with hands that weren't functioning properly. She untied her black apron and let it drop. She pushed through the steel service exit into the alley behind the building. The air outside was January, cold, and tasted like river mud and rain. She walked, then she ran. She didn't stop until she hit the light of Chupitula Street, where the neon of a corner bar cast orange and pink streaks across the wet pavement, and the traffic moved at the pace of a city that didn't know what had just happened. 6 blocks away, he killed a man. The thought ran in circles. Factually, she had. Whatever was in Voss's glass, she had put it there. Her hands, her decision, her calculation. She hadn't known, when she made the choice, whether she would be executed on the spot, whether Cleet would realize, whether Garrett would turn the gun on her instead. She had done it anyway. The only question now was whether Callum Dre would thank her or bury her. Back at Velvet, Iron. The answer to that question was already being prepared. Alessandro Callum had stood absolutely still, while the paramedics worked with practiced futility on Leonard Voss's cooling body. He'd spoken 3 sentences to the responding officers, all of them courteous, none of them informative. His attorney arrived 11 minutes after the call and handled the remainder. Callum himself crossed the bar to where Crispin had retreated against the mirrored wall, clutching a bar towel with the grip of a drowning man. "You look unwell." "Crispin, Mr. Dre. I swear to God, it wasn't Cleet came to me last week," he said. "How much did you owe Voss's people?" Crispin's throat worked. 68,000. The poker debts. You thought Voss would take the debt in exchange for a vial in my glass." Callum set down the untouched glass he'd been holding. "And Cleet approached you, because Cleet was Voss's man from the beginning. Voss wasn't trying to negotiate tonight. He was staging a succession." Crispin made a sound that wasn't quite words. Garrett had materialized at Crispin's left without anyone seeing him move. "Take him to the house on Harmony Street," Callum said. "Complete conversations. Full accounting of who else Cleet spoke to. Then resolve the Crispin situation permanently." "Yes, sir." Callum walked out of Velvet and Iron, through the front entrance, stepping past the paramedics and the blue and red pulse of emergency lighting without acknowledgement. His car was already at the curb, a dark navy Suburban. Armored. Engine running. He didn't get in. He stood on the sidewalk in the January cold and replayed, with photographic precision, the 11 seconds that had taken place at table 11. The hip against the armrest. The gasped apology. The impossible, seamless rotation of 2 crystal glasses during a window of distraction, so narrow it should not have existed. She had done it alone. No training. No backup. No guarantee that he would see, or understand, or protect her. She had done it because she chose to find the server. He said to the air, knowing Garrett's second was behind him, "Nora Calloway. She's on foot. Pull city camera coverage on magazine. Tropitolas. And the riverfront. Don't stop her. Don't approach. Track her, and bring the car to wherever she lands." Nora was 3 miles from the club, standing on the levee above the river. When she heard the vehicle, she'd been walking the waterfront path without purpose, the Mississippi churning black and enormous below the concrete wall, her breath coming in ragged clouds in the freezing air. She had nowhere specific to go. Her apartment was the first place anyone would look. The dark navy Suburban pulled up on the access road behind the levee path. The passenger window came down. Callum Dre was in the back seat. "Get in." "Nora." She stopped walking. She turned. She considered. For approximately 4 seconds. "Running. Cleet's people will be looking for loose ends before sunrise," he said. The voice was even unhurried. The freight organization had 6 lieutenants loyal to Voss. All of them know Voss died at Velvet and Iron. By morning, they'll be working the timeline backward. Your name is in the staff register. I didn't see anything, Nora said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I don't know anything. You know precisely what happened, and precisely why. So do I." He held her gaze. "I'm not going to debate the terms of your survival on a levee in January. Get in the car." He extended his hand. She looked at it for a long moment. She thought about the debt. 41 more months. She thought about the endless quiet of 6 years of invisibility, the deliberate smallness of her life, the way she had learned to take up less and less space in rooms full of men who never once registered her as a person worth registering. She thought, about 2 years ago, when a visiting associate named Bergman had cornered her near the coat check and put his hand on her arm in a way that made her stomach turn. And she had looked across the bar for help and found nothing but politely averted eyes, except one set. Callum Dre had been at the bar. He'd looked up. He'd crossed the room. He'd said 4 words to Bergman, quiet, without theater, without the need for anyone else to hear them, and Bergman had removed his hand and not come back. 4 words. For a woman he had never spoken to, whose name he didn't know, whose existence had never registered in any meaningful way. He had seen a person worth basic dignity, and she had never forgotten it. She reached out and placed her cold fingers into his warm hand. The door closed behind her. The Dre organization maintained a private residence on the 34th floor of a converted warehouse building in the warehouse district, floor-to-ceiling windows, looking south over the river. The city's lights scattered below, like dropped coins. Nora stood in the center of the living area, in her wool coat and service uniform. Holding a glass of sparkling water, Callum had handed her without asking whether she wanted it. She did want it. Her hands had mostly stopped shaking. "Are you going to have me killed?" The question came out more directly than she intended. She had decided, somewhere on the drive over, that she was done being careful with her words. If the answer was yes, she would rather know it plainly. Callum was sitting on the edge of a low wooden table, jacket off. The sleeves of his dark shirt rolled to the forearm. He was watching her with the same precise attention he brought to everything. But there was something different in it now, a quality she couldn't immediately categorize. "You saved my life," he said, "which means I owe you a debt. Which means, no, I'm a witness. I know what Crispin did. I know it was cartel money through Voss. In your world, witnesses don't survive debts. They create them." He almost smiled. "It didn't reach completion. You've been in that room for 6 years. He said, "You know how every negotiation in that lounge ends before the words start. You knew what Voss was doing before I confirmed it. You watched a bartender add a compound to a glass from a vial hidden in a ring, in low light, in a reflection, while managing a full tray, and then you switched those glasses during a window that lasted less than 2 seconds. He paused. "That is not a witness. That is an asset." Nora set down her water glass. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't go back to carrying trays." He stood. The room felt slightly smaller. "You were invisible because you chose to be. Because it was safe. Because no one in that building gave you a reason to be otherwise. You gave me a reason," she said quietly. 2 years ago. Bergman." He looked at her. Something shifted in the precise economy of his expression. "I remember it," he said. "You were at the coat check. He had his hand on your arm. You didn't know my name." "No." "You still crossed the room." He was quiet for a moment. "Basic conduct," he said finally. "Not heroism. It was the only time." Nora said, and she kept her voice level, even though the admission cost her something, that anyone in that building looked at me like I was there, like I existed in the room as a person rather than a mechanism. Callum took 2 steps toward her. He stopped at a distance that was too close to be professional and too restrained to be anything else, yet you are extraordinarily observant, he said, brave in a way that most of my trained security people are not. You understand how power moves in a room before the people in that room have acknowledged it themselves. He looked at her steadily. And you have spent 6 years hiding all of that because it wasn't safe to be seen. It still isn't safe. It is now. His voice dropped slightly. Not to softness. Exactly. But to something more direct, more intentional. Voss's lieutenants will be handled by morning. Cleet will not see sunrise. The debt you inherited from your grandmother Garrett has the account number. It's resolved. She stared at him. That's not. I don't operate on charity. He said simply, I operate on precision. You are a precise person. You belong at a table, not behind one. He reached up slowly enough that she could have moved away. And she didn't, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face with 2 fingers. The touch was careful. Deliberate. When this is settled, he said, his voice low and unhurried. I want you where I can see you, where you have something to say and someone who will hear it. Nora stood very still, something shifting in her chest with the slow, irreversible momentum of a very large stone. She had spent 6 years making herself small, learning to fold, learning to disappear, learning to survive a world that decided her worth in a single glance and found her wanting. She had saved a man's life in 11 seconds with nothing but 6 years of patient attention and the willingness to act when it mattered, and the most control. Calculating, dangerous man in New Orleans was standing in front of her, telling her that she was finally, exactly, seeing. I pay my debts, she said. You owe me nothing, he replied. The scales ran out in your favor the moment you picked up that tray. She held his gaze, for the first time in longer than she could precisely remember. Nora Calloway did not look away. The woman who had spent 6 years perfecting invisibility was gone, in the window glass behind Callum, with the Black River 34 floors below, and the lights of the city scattering endlessly into the dark. She caught the faint reflection of her own face. She looked different, not smaller, not apologetic, not like furniture. She looked like someone who had just realized the room had always been hers.